session.
Okay.
And the recording will be placed on our project website, and that's where it lives. It doesn't really go anywhere else. And you can see our prior webinars also on our project website if you're interested. You can see how technology always seems to be fooling around with us a little bit. Yeah, but we'll spend around an hour together, and yeah, I'm just so excited to be here together with all of you. So Cheryl, welcome so much, and I hand the word over to you.
Okay, and what now I'm going to try to do is share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with that. Yeah, desktop, that's what I want to do. Now, let's see if I can, sorry, let's, can you see this? Do you see a slideshow?
No, not as now. There's a green button in the bottom of your screen, is there not, that says share?
Yeah, I pressed that.
And then you have to choose which part of the screen you want to share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Share screen. I just pressed desktop, but is there something else that I should be saying?
No, I think that's okay.
But the desktop just gives me you guys.
But now you're
starting. There it is.
Okay, now, all right, hang on.
Now we see your desktop.
Okay, my
beautiful
let's
ocean
see
side.
if I can get this up and this up. How is that?
Yeah.
It
You
looks,
can see something.
it looks totally correct.
Totally correct. Okay.
Look at us mastering technology.
I'm going to. All right. So having gotten that far in the technology, and the talk, I really wanted to leave a little time for discussion, but I timed this to be about 32 minutes. So it won't be a huge amount of time thanks to technical glitches, but never mind. We'll get a little bit of discussion time, I hope. So, and really, Nana, thank you so much for the invitation, and also an invitation to share some work that is still in progress for me. And I will start with a story about Andy and his family. When Andy was 9, he went on his first ski trip. His parents, Tanya and Frank, were astonished by his experience, hearing for the first time a joyful laugh from this child as he flew down the mountain in an adaptive chair, guided by rehabilitation professionals. Andy is quadriplegic, nonverbal, and cortically blind. Frank, the father, describes their shock as they stood at the bottom of a hill and witnessed his descent down the snowy slope. I never heard him laugh like that before, and he was happy. Frank emphasizes the word happy. I'm going to consider this experience of the parents from a phenomenological perspective. As you probably know, phenomenology, of course, is interdisciplinary, rooted initially in philosophy, and foregrounds experience as its subject of investigation. Before continuing, I just want to say a couple words about what I'm after, why this turn to phenomenology. What has attracted to me in the past few years is especially phenomenology's focus on disorientation and surprise, situations of suddenly being unsure of what's happening, ones in which our common sense is somehow disturbed. And there's a sort of, I'm being oversimple here, but let's see. Okay, here we go. So to be oversimple, it contrasts two kinds of knowing. There's a kind of knowing which is about accumulation, adding to an established body of knowledge. But the kind of knowing that phenomenology privileges goes in reverse. It is that situation when what is obvious, what we thought we knew, what is common sense, becomes questionable. And it's also described as an experience of a kind of rupture or a shock by phenomenologists. And I'm going to be thinking a lot with Jean-Luc Nancy today, and he speaks of this kind of event as something that takes thinking by surprise. Some of you might know that I have been quite interested in Hannah Arendt's take on this and her metaphor of defrosting, which I have used a great deal, and others of you are taking up in some situations. So where perplexities arise. So here's an example from this father where here's Frank talking right around the time of this same ski trip. And he's describing to us the situation of becoming a father and the way that the common sense idea of fathering is thrown into question for him. So Frank says, you should know that Frank is, so the families I've been following are African-American, so he's an African-American man. He's quite an athlete, and he's from Chicago, and you may or may not know that Chicago is a big sports town. So keep that in mind as Frank describes his idea of fathering. You know, all fathers, they want to be able to throw the ball in the backyard. You always picture that. You find out you got a son, the football thing, American football. Go out there and play some football, things like that. Andy's disabilities, when the parents discover that he has some significant disabilities while he's still an infant, these disturb Frank's picture. Here's what Frank says about it. With Andy, it's a special father and son relationship. I learned how to play with him his way. So Frank becomes a different kind of father than the father he anticipated. Note, by the way, the reversal of power and authority, that common sense. Who is learning from who? Who is following who? The common sense certainties that Frank and Tanya inherited about parenting and family life had already been disturbed when it became apparent as an infant that Andy was not developing as expected. And this revealed to them something that Nancy, unfortunately, I'm not going to do justice to Nancy on this one, but what Nancy describes as a relational plurality, the community of the singular plural, a community beyond sameness. Andy's presence complicates the idea of a familial we as what Solons calls a mutuality of being based upon likeness or resemblance. They're regularly challenged when trying to anticipate their son's sensory responses to the world around him, precisely because he experiences the world so differently than they do. And I should just note that phenomenology has tremendous interest. In fact, phenomenologists like Nancy foreground the intersubjectivity, our relationality. So singularity is not best understood as attached to an individual alone, let's say Andy, but as a relational experience. From this angle, it's better to think about Andy's presence in the family as a kind of generator of singular experiences, one that the parents growing up in families who didn't have family members with his kind of neurosensory differences were not prepared for and could not anticipate. And I've been thinking about this for a long time with a book that I really hope gets out next year called, at least gets submitted, called The Method of Perplexity, where I'm, as I always do, focusing on ethnographic particulars and perplexing particulars as guides. So there are several questions in this approach to perplexity that are orienting me. One is a very common one for all of us here who are anthropologists in particular. What perplexes and disorients me, the ethnographer, in my in scenes of fieldwork where I'm not familiar? But the second question is my primary question. What surprises or perplexes the people I study? How do I follow their perplexities? And why is surprise so important in practices of care in family life, at least for the families I have been studying and following. How is it related to world traveling, which I will explain. I just wanted to put up this piece of art from Maria Spire. It's a part of a project that that Luna Grun organized around aging, and I won't say more except this is an artistic portrait of another family and their relational life around a child with profound disabilities. A perplexing picture, I would say. So Nancy, he thinks that surprise is ephemeral and fleeting, that it ruptures, but we can't stay with it. But I'm amending Nancy a little bit, because for the families I've been following, there are real stakes in staying with surprise. Not all surprises, but some surprises. The ski trip is a paradigmatic example of a kind of surprising experience that these parents want to stay with in some way. And so I'm going to be talking about practices, family practices, through which people stay with surprises that are important to them. And okay, so here's a typical philosopher's quote. I really love it, but it's not the easiest to decipher. To think the surprise of an event, he says, must be something other than winning over surprise in order to detach it from its surprise by assigning it a place under a concept. So in other words, there must be another way of thinking about surprise that doesn't sort of turn it into one of a token of a type. Andy's experience on the ski trip as just one of many possible experiences for children with physical disabilities, say. So this not domesticating it under a concept, keeping it as an experience of surprise, is something these parents are quite committed to. And I'm going to look at 3 practices that they carry out by which they keep the surprise of the ski trip alive. One is storytelling, which I'll say more about. Another is a kind of generativity in which the ski trip becomes a natal moment. Something new is born, new practices of care are set in motion. And then this world traveling, which is in the title, I think I won't even say one more word about it now, but I will say it will become apparent what I have in mind. And in addition to world traveling, I'll say a little bit about travel costs. Okay, so storytelling as re-experiencing the surprise of an event. So here are Frank and Tanya co-narrating some years later the experience of seeing their son go down that ski slope for the first time. So here they are talking, overlapping with each other, talking together. Frank says, and the first time we went, they strapped him down real good, and he came down on the slope for the first time. It's a smile I've never experienced before. Tanya overlapping. He was laughing. Frank, he was like, wee. Frank imitates. Tanya, but then, Frank overlapping, and then we started crying. And Tanya, oh God, I'm at the bottom of the snow hill, the road. Frank starts laughing as she continues. I'm going, oh God, what are they going to do? And then the ski instructors come down that hill with him. I think, no, 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 no. And I'm like, too late. I'm like, oh my God. And as a mother, you're like, oh my God, what are they doing to my baby? They crazy. Generativity. The natality of some surprise. In different ways, Frank and Tanya take this experience to heart, not only through this re-narration. Oh, I have to tell you a little bit more about stories. Sorry about that. I'm going back to this one. In this storytelling, notice 2 features of stories. One is that even the simplest story, a first-person story I tell about an experience, has a double perspective. The perspective of me, the narrator, telling about a past event when I know how things turned out, and me, this is a very simple version, me, the character in the story, who does not know how things unfold. You can see in this storytelling that although they're looking back several years, they re-inhabit that moment when they do not know how things will turn out, a moment of suspense. So, generativity and new care practices. So Frank, as I mentioned, the athlete in the family, he decides to enroll his son after this ski trip in a community soccer team, but one not designed for children in wheelchairs. The ski trip becomes an embodied experience for him. He suddenly sees that his son is capable of far more body pleasure than he had realized. Andy's evident fearlessness in his swift descent down that snowy slope suggests that other risky movements, the kind that soccer demands, rather than inducing fear or terror or even discomfort, might give his son pleasure and excitement. If Andy could ski, why not soccer? Here was another activity that could be adapted to make space for a child like Andy. Frank said, because sometimes he gets overlooked. Special needs kids, they get pushed to the side. And notably, I'll show you a picture from a video of this family. So Frank goes to the local soccer team who have no children in wheelchairs or physical disabilities. He talks them in to adapting their soccer game so that his child can play. And I didn't show it to you here, but you know, in the video and watching this, there's this kid being propelled by some other kid down the field, racing crazily toward the ball. This is a family, this soccer game was so, it hit me so profoundly that it became the opening vignette for my Moral Laboratories book years ago. But what I didn't discover until a couple years ago is that all of this invention by the father was preceded by the shock of the ski trip. So this is a generating of new care practices. And there's the father with the red sweater standing proudly among the other parents. Andy's pleasure, so world traveling, Andy's pleasure flying down that snowy slope initiated other practices for Tanya, and so I'm going to focus on Tanya now. It fueled her willingness to battle authorities in the clinic, at school, for her son's care. She is a fighter, she says, something she learned from her Jamaican mother, and she becomes a fierce protector of her son's rights. An increasingly vocal disability activist in the school system, banding with other parents to advocate for their children. This and other things she does on behalf of her child involve a kind of world traveling. And I'm taking this from two post-colonial feminist philosophers, Lagunas and then later Ortega, who think with this idea of world traveling. So from their perspective, and then I'll take you back to Tanya, from their perspective, world traveling involves moving from home worlds where one is at ease to worlds one travels to where one is not. Now, dis-ease, of course, is not necessarily a negative thing. It can be a source of expanding vistas. Any of us who are anthropology teachers, we tell this to our students. But Lagunas, in particular, also points out some of the costs to this, which I will return to, and which are relevant to Tanya in particular. If we travel to worlds that are not our own, and we should hail from a marginalized community, in our travels, we might find ourselves the subject of an arrogant gaze, reduced in the eyes of others. And these two theorists, Ortega and Lagunas, one comes from Nicaragua, the other from Argentina, and they moved to academic environments in the United States and had this experience of this being subject to an arrogant gaze. Tanya and Frank also necessarily become world travelers, confronting new forms of arrogant perception, not simply when they go outside of their home community, but suddenly with the arrival of Andy with people who are their neighbors. Suddenly they are travelers as soon as they leave their house, experiencing a kind of prejudicial ableism where they might least expect it. But contrastively, they discover resources for support in unexpected quarters. So, and for Tanya, I'm going to speak about her to illustrate both these sides of world traveling, the expanding part and the reducing part. She maneuvers through an enormous amount of bureaucratic red tape to remove her son from the local working class Black neighborhood where she lives in LA. This is the Englewood area. So if you can look on the kind of the far right side of this little partial map of LA, you see South LA, Crenshaw. That's the area that she's from, predominantly Black, predominantly working class, or it used to be predominantly Black. She manages to get Andy into a school in Bel Air, the richest neighborhood in all of LA. Bel Air is up there, kind of closer to the left side of, at least the way I'm looking at the screen, in green. When she does this, she meets a lot of families who have children with disabilities, but come from very different communities than hers. She says, I started talking to parents, Jewish, Iranian, and they were like, you didn't know about this service? You didn't know about that service? Didn't you try to get something from your school to pay for speech therapy? So Tanya had been trying to get services like speech therapy completely unsuccessfully. But obviously in Bel Air, where it was much wealthier and there were more services, these parents also knew some tricks. Tanya once met a true exotic, a Scandinavian. Okay, the two worlds. You just get a little picture. That's the entrance to Bel Air to the right. And that's the Englewood area where Tanya lives. So Tanya once meets a true exotic, a Scandinavian, a woman from Finland. And she recounts her experience with some astonishment. She brings a story of her encounter back to a family group meeting. We had in this big research team that followed a whole group of African-American families over many years. We had regular family meetings. And in one of these family meetings where parents just discussed what was going on at home, very informal, Tanya tells everyone what she has discovered by meeting this Finnish person. And so here is her narrating her encounter. So here's Tanya's version. The Finnish woman says, in my country, we have school for our children with special needs. It's understood that they get therapy. They go to the pool. They have speech, physio, occupational therapy, and the state pays for that. It's just a given. Tanya reports, what? What? She's never heard of such a thing. She then addresses all the other parents in the room. Here we are, the richest country in the world, but the parents, and she means particularly that group of parents, are having to work against the system. It's just a hostile environment. One of the parents in the group asks, which children qualify in Finland? Is it every child, regardless of who the parents are, or of insurance coverage? You might catch the race and class implications of that question. Tanya responds confidently. I don't know how accurate this is, but here's what Tanya says. Every child, regardless, no problem. The state takes care of that, helps with that. So travel costs, one of the most important aspects of world traveling, as introduced by Lagonas and Ortega, is that it concerns how selves are changed. There are, of course, some gifts, the capacity, especially the learned capacity to be in a situation where one is ill at ease, which can be an important teacher. And indeed, I saw this in a variety of ways among the families in our study. And here's a phrase that I actually kind of like a lot, offered not from my group of participants, but from a disability activist and a father with a son with autism, who says, that what he learned and what needs to be learned is neurocosmopolitanism. To become a neurocosmopolitan is someone who learns to travel not only in unfamiliar social spaces, let's say to rich white Bel Air, but also to travel and be able to move in neurodiverse interspaces where the world is sensed and embodied in very different ways, and where we communities, the singular plural we that I can't explain to you, but that Nancy proposes, are created. You might think of the soccer team that Frank helps to create, or does in fact initiate as one such neurocosmopolitan community. But these feminists who propose world traveling are also attentive to the ways that the self can be reduced. And for Lagonas, who initiates this concept of world traveling, she speaks of the loss of her playful self. Home in Argentina, all her friends thought of her as very playful, almost carefree. But when she asks her colleagues and friends in the States, in the US, everyone sees her as very serious. And she laments the loss of this playful self. Tanya also feels a reduction in her own way. As a fighter, she says she becomes more Jamaican, more like her mother, the woman she admires most in the world, becoming this unrelenting advocate. And she's very proud of that capacity to rise to the occasion. But like many of the other mothers in our study, she also has been worried about the cost of it to the rest of her children, to the relationship with her husband, and to her own health. She is exhausted all the time, she says. Okay, so I've zoomed in a lot on one family. I will now zoom out very quickly and just try to offer a few takeaways from this very quick tour in another kind of traveling tour. So I'll end by asking this question: when we attend to perplexing or surprising moments, what comes into view? And what I've been really interested in, which contrasts with a lot of the way the philosophers talk about these events of surprise, is the at-stakeness of that I have found ethnographically among many of the parents, a commitment to staying with some of these moments of surprise. Of course, lots of them disappear, and lots nobody wants to dwell with. But some moments, like a ski trip, generate something that these parents want to dwell with. And I just began thinking about some practices of dwelling in surprise. One includes storytelling and the reliving of moments of not knowing. Another is generativity, the kind of natality in which new care practices come into being, and they might generate new surprises. And also this sort of generativity attached to world traveling, where, for example, somebody like Tanya meets all manner of exotic Scandinavians and other people who reveal to her a world she would never have imagined. Okay, but it can cost. So I will stop with that. And I want to stop sharing. All right.
Wow.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing this, these stories and this framework for thinking or dwelling with surprise as an analytical object. This was really fascinating. And I have questions and ideas, and I'm super inspired to also in what I'm in right now, where I'm surprised sometimes. But I think we should start by maybe asking the other people who are with us in the seminar if they have questions or something that they would like to share with us in this moment. And I think those of you who are categorized as attendees. You are all able to raise your hand if you want, and then I can tell you that you can talk and you can unmute. I have given you all talking permissions because it seems strange to not have that. So if anyone has, if you have questions or something, you can raise your hand. I think, I'm not sure. Maybe that's not right.
I do want to say that I'm really happy to get comments if it's possible, technologically, because this is I'm still working this through. I mean, some of the ideas are familiar, defrosting. I guess you've heard me talk about that endlessly, but this staying with surprise, practices of dwelling, this is another take on this.
Yeah.
So I'm quite intrigued with how both questions and comments.
Yeah. So Oliver has raised his hand. Oliver,
Okay.
you have the word.
Thank you. And thank you so much for a really interesting talk here. It's a super banal question, but when does something stop being surprising? If you dwell in surprise, does it keep its sort of surprisingness? If you retell the same story again and again, how does something, what qualities does something have to stay surprising?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would just say, I don't know, but I want to say, I don't know in a slightly better way than that. I think maybe as long as it matters, I think the at stakeness is really important in thinking about when and where surprises live in a family's life. And so, you know, when I'm talking to this family, they're in the midst, you know, their son at this point is maybe 12 years old. They're still trying to figure out where can their child be? What even gives their son pleasure? He's often quite unhappy. So it smiles and laughs. This is not the usual thing. So maybe if it was part of his everyday life, they wouldn't need that story anymore. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't still offer something that is still, it still has the quality of unexpectedness. It's not day to day. So I would say this is an ethnographic question. I do think, that's always what we can say, right? You can get out of a lot of things that way, but I honestly think it is. I did want to point out, even though I couldn't, my first work was on narrative, and I kind of feel like maybe I'm returning to some features of it because I really think as an aesthetic form. Now, we can tell stories about things we've told the same story about 1,000 times. There's not one bit of surprise. We forget that we were ever a character who didn't know what will happen. So as an ethnographer, when I interview people, I do pay attention to the kind of stories that seem to involve this reliving or re-experiencing, and those that absolutely don't. And I get both kinds. So I just look for certain kinds of features, but I think this is a potential of narrative because it has a double perspective. It doesn't mean that it's always mobilized. It might have mattered to these parents that they were talking to us, the researchers, and we didn't know the story. So it's new to us. So maybe they can't sit around the kitchen table and feel the same surprise. I don't know. Maybe it requires a certain situation of storytelling, an audience that makes it come to life. But I also could see that this father, the number of things he did with his child, and he would refer back to that ski experience. So I also think it lives not necessarily as a story at all. It did because somehow us being there, they told it. But it also lived as soccer. And then it lived as swim practice. And then it lived as an idea that he could hook up a bike on the back of his bike, an adaptive bike. He thought, maybe I can make one. And they could do a bike trip together, he and his son. So that's why I didn't just stick with storytelling. It's only one possible practice. Okay. Thank you, Oliver, for that question. I can't see you, but I imagine you.
Yeah, thanks. So no one else has raised their hand in the meantime, so I'll ask a question that I was
Okay.
sitting with. And that is, okay, I want to stay with this wonderful, beautiful moment of this disabled child expressing pleasure for the first time. And then I just want to take us to the dark side, because I'm a dark, dark person.
Yeah.
To say, you know, what is the relationship between the surprise, as you has presented it here, and trauma? Because in many ways, I feel like there are many things with experiencing trauma that kind of has a similar structure to the practices that you are also identifying within the surprise. You know, so this surprise had a positive, you know, sort of framework, but in many ways, and this is just like the interviews that I've done in the last few weeks makes me think about this, that the narration of reliving and going back into the experience and the emotion, also the natality of the event that might set your life in motion in a new way that it didn't have before, whether negative or positive. It might also be this terrible thing happened and I grew, I overcame. It might also be that, you know, I lost everything, or my life did not turn out as I wanted because of this. And then in the last bit, also the sort of the world traveling of being pushed out, or sort of, or being pulled out, or being looked out. You're like, oh, I see this thing. I need to go into this place to get where to this other. So how would you consider that relationship?
It's a very important question. And even though I didn't spend a lot of time on the cost, I did want to stick in travel costs in there because I think it's hugely important. And about the trauma, I would actually say that Tanya tries to, the mother, she is not an athlete. She is 100% not in favor of this whole, you know, it has really, she's not just being jokey. She's truly was terrified. And then it took so many years for the father to convince her, even after this, to put their son in the soccer team. And and he felt that he knew his son around what was around that he had learned some things by following his son. You know, you have to learn to play his way, he says. And so, I mean, I'm a bit trusting that he has learned something. And I'm also hearing this mother's, for her, this was traumatic. You know, when she's saying, oh my God, no, no, no. And then she's like, too late. She's already going down the hill. I've agreed to this and now there's nothing I can do about it. And she's trying to convey the trauma for her, that's as a mother, of letting her son do this insane thing that some insane professionals have hooked up. But I would say, and this is in the Moral Laboratories book, that for her, a turning point was with the soccer game when she was so afraid that Andy would get knocked over. They would dump him over in a wheelchair. And he did get knocked over. He did fall down, but he was okay about it. And that I think was also another turning point for her, where she thought, all right, he's really different from me. He has all of this fragility, but he's not responding the way I would imagine him to respond. And I would also say from my meetups with Andy that he might have been nonverbal, but I tell you, you knew when he liked something and when he didn't like something, he could make his emotions pretty well felt, and you kind of couldn't ignore them. You had to sort of handle them. So I would say there were clues, but I don't want to so I don't think they were wrong or misreading the trauma of this, that it was trauma, but they somehow didn't get the hang of it.
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't also that was a question. It was more like this analytical thing of like, what, you know, what is the analytically the difference between the two, right? But
Yep.
I can definitely I see the idea. Yeah.
But I think you could, I mean, in the also in what I've written about previously, there is the event of surprise when a child is murdered in the front lawn, and the older brother goes into deep depression, and he vows to change because he is a gang member, and it's like, okay, we can't, they're killing them too young, and his brother wasn't even in a gang, and so I don't mean to analytically pre-establish a surprise as a good thing. And so it's really good that you're telling me that, because it could be the event of surprise, which is a trauma, which also has a natality to it.
Yeah.
I didn't do it in this paper, but I've been thinking a lot with Glissant, the Martinican philosopher, and he talks about the natality of the slave experience in the archipelagos, Martinique, where he's from, as the creativity in response to absolute devastation, as a situation of, he calls it a womb abyss, a metaphor I'm very fond of, because I think it conveys more than Nancy does.
Yeah.
Natality and absolute devastation can go hand in hand.
Oh,
All right.
beautiful. Okay, well, Elsa also raised her hand.
Okay.
So Elsa, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for your talk, Cheryl. It was very interesting to listen to, and I'm not even sure about my question, but I'm personally I'm very into movement, both as the object for ethnography and as a method, and it's just interesting that that movement is a central part of this family story, of this boy's story, and that it gives him joy in that sense, and how the family takes movement as something they want to work with, even though he can't move himself. I just find that fascinating, and it made me think of a Danish study that's called the Twin Project, that where handicapped, disabled people are being moved by non-disabled people, and they're doing a research study on happiness and health benefits in Denmark about this. But it's just very fascinating to hear this how movement is central to this boy. And have you gone into this aspect of movement, not physical activity maybe, but movement as something more phenomenological?
Yeah. It's a great phenomenology topic. I mean, embodiment, if that is an essential phenomenology word. But yes, that's a great comment. Thank you. And I do think in this Method of Perplexity book that I'm trying to finish, I brought in a collaborator, and she has a background as an occupational therapist, and also a background in art history. So she's interesting. And she works as a clinician. She has worked, I mean, she's a professor now, but as a clinician for many years, she worked with children who were nonverbal through movement. So she is, I feel that she's the expert as compared to me. I seem to be a very verbal person, so I feel less equipped to really theorize about movement, but she has a lot of amazing examples of how in certain kinds of therapeutic settings or home settings, various kinds of co-movement together create spaces of possibility where it can bring happiness, or children that didn't seem able to be the initiators find ways to initiate. And it also, I just find it's also so interesting, this idea of movement, the reversal of the usual way we understand learning movement, say in a family structure, instead of fathers throwing the ball around, teaching their sons notably, how to play ball, it's now this father has to follow his child and become acutely aware of small movements, of vocally, since he can't speak in words, of what his vocalizations mean. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things, and this twin study, that's very interesting. In that one, it sounds like the ones who do not have the disability are moving those who have the disability. And of course, that's one way to go, but there's also, I'm seeing a variety of this in which children make small movements that they can do and get followed up. In one other family, rubbing noses becomes a very important form of connecting, and the child begins to figure out with small gestures a nose rubbing that then the parents pick up, and then it becomes a ritual of connection. So it's very interesting. I think the movement piece is really interesting, and I wish I knew more Merleau-Ponty and was a better to help me with thinking with it, and was better at ethnographically describing movement. But it's really interesting.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Right. Very cool. Is anyone else sitting with a question or something that they would like to share?
It's yeah, I was just curious. Maybe I'll ask a question. We have a couple minutes.
Yes, you can ask us a question.
Yeah, I mean, are other people seeing this? Does this event of surprise business seem really, in your own ethnographic situations, did it register, or does it seem like it's not and following perplexity and how people dwell with perplexity? It may not be the question you've been thinking with, but if you kind of consider your ethnographic situations, is it recognizable?
That's a wonderful question. Let's do a quick round. Elizabeth is first.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Cheryl. Certainly your last part about the travel and the costs of travel and how exhausting it can be to encounter surprise again and again and again long term. That is definitely recognizable in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. So especially the costly part where surprise becomes a kind of enemy, like there's never a calm moment. That's interesting. Yeah. Like surprise overload. I'll have to think about that. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. It definitely resonates with where I'm sitting. I'm in the beginning of a field work in a place that is familiar to me, but that is also new. In a new way. Resonates both for myself and for the stories that I'm working with now. Lone is next to share.
Yeah, I just thought I would also contribute, even if we talk a lot, Cheryl, but thanks a lot for this talk. I actually think that what you bring to the fore here, I mean, we always see the burden and the cost, and I really like this concept you brought in about the cost of traveling, because it really translates. But I really think that what you give us here is a way to not only pay attention to that, because I think there's a big risk. For example, I work with dementia, and the costs and the pain and the suffering people feel is palpable. You know, no denying it should be there. But I really think there's a risk of overlooking the kind of, I don't know, the kind of strength, wisdom, creativity that comes from living with difficult circumstances. So I really feel that it's just a support to you to keep doing it. But I think that what you have always managed to do is to keep together, like when you work with hope, to show that tragedy and hope are not far apart.
Yeah.
And I just feel there's a risk to our discipline. And now I'm getting all too grandiose in my statements here, but actually also to our Danish society, if we can only think about the good or hope, or in this case, potentiality in relation to situations of non-suffering. So I just want to appreciate the putting together of the traveling potentiality and the traveling cost, or the perplexity as something that can be both, like Nana pointed out, perplexity or surprise can really happen with trauma, but also with these kinds of events. So I just want to keep the two together. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
I really do recognize the perplexity, potentiality in dementia field work.
Yeah. I mean, it is, you know, I always risk being that kind of American that, and now we have a joy campaign going in our politics. So I risk it, which thank God, you know, I mean,
we needed that. We needed.
I risk being the kind of American that comes over and talks about hope and joy and has some ridiculous, naive optimism. And I do try to keep the two together, but I have to admit that almost like the bleaker the circumstance, the more I'm try to be attentive to the ways that my participants are attentive and care about pleasure or joy or that first laugh. That I'm not, hopefully I'm not just imposing it, but I'm actually, that they want this to be recognized as part of family life. Not all of them, for sure, but many of the families. This father, for example, he said in no uncertain terms, he said, I'm really glad when my wife got pregnant again, she had twins and they were girls. And I'm glad she didn't have a boy because I want Andy to be my son. So let's set aside the gender issues momentarily. Forgive him for that because he's trying to say that I want to pour my energy into claiming this child as my son. And I think that says something about where he gets staked, that it's not only trauma.
That's a beautiful place to end on, not only trauma, but also...
Not only trauma.
Yeah.
There is trauma, but not only trauma.
But maybe also, in a sense, focusing on the surprise removes the binary need to categorize things as good or bad. Yes. Which, as Luna said, is sometimes gets a little tedious if you have to do that all the time. So that helps. Well, we have now reached 4 o'clock and 3 o'clock here in the Faroe Islands, where I'm sitting, and some of us are. And we conclude the seminar for today.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks again for the invitation and for a chance to try out this world traveling and put it together with the event of surprise. That's my, ongoing bit of a piece of a project.
Thank you so much for taking us traveling together with your thoughts. This was a really, really interesting journey. And well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I look forward to journeying forward together. With more surprises and ideas. I just want to let us all know, those of us who are still left, that the next seminar is on the 31st of October. You might note that these seminars happen every other month on the last Thursday of the month. It's a little bit difficult, but we will let you know when it happens. And next time we have Stine Adrian, who is presenting. She's a professor in sociology of health, welfare, and qualitative methods at the Aarhus University of Norway. And I think we can expect her to come and talk to us about about death in the beginning of life, as she has worked a lot with parents who lose pregnancies and very young children. Yes, so that's next time, and we hope to see you all. But today, thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing your thoughts and ideas, and safe journeys also for that paper which is being developed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you again. Thanks for the questions and comments. Bye.
See you all soon.